Good evening to everyone present here tonight. My name is Brian and I will be your host for tonight. On behalf of the JPO family, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone tuning in for tonight's broadcast. We hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe indoors. A friendly reminder to maintain good hygiene at all times and maintain social distancing when heading out. As we'd like to continue improving your experience with us, please help us achieve this by completing the poll that will be published during this broadcast. To anyone who's interested in sharing tonight's broadcast, a live feed is being shared on the JPO YouTube channel. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A section down below. For those of you joining us on YouTube, please type your questions down in the live chat down below. A recording of the webinar will also be uploaded onto the YouTube channel. Today's seminar features Nicholas Tischerman, with his topic being a new challenge every day. What makes an oboist life different from other musicians, and how this informs his musical approach. At the age of 8, Nicholas Tischerman began his oboe studies and later graduated from Juilliard's pre-college division under Richard D'Alessio. He earned his Bachelor of Music from the New England Conservatory in Boston with John Ferrillo and pursued graduate studies at the Colburn School in Los Angeles with Anne-Marie Gabriel. Nicholas Tischerman currently serves as a second and assistant principal oboe of the Colorado Symphony Orchestra. Additionally, he has appeared with the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra, the Sarasota Orchestra, and the San Antonio Symphony Orchestra. During the summers, he has performed at the Verbier, Tanglewood, and Brevard music festivals, as well as the New York String Orchestra Seminar. In the summer of 2016, he toured the Baltic countries and Scandinavia with the YOA Orchestra of the Americas. As an educator, he maintains a small private studio in Denver and has worked to make music education a part of communities from Los Angeles to Tallinn, Estonia, through programs of the Colorado Symphony Orchestra, Colburn School, the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, the NPR's From the Top, and YOA Orchestra of Americas. As our JPO family attendees are mostly students ranging from primary school to college, their parents and their teachers, the sharing of knowledge and advice here for all of us today is invaluable and greatly appreciated. The JPO is very honored to have Nicholas join in as our guest for today. I hope they'll all join me in giving him a warm welcome. Without further ado, once again, a very good day to Nicholas Tischerman. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nick.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, the pleasure is ours because you're joining us at about what 7 a.m. your time. So
Yes,
yeah,
good
quite
morning.
early there. All right. So to start today's interview, what can you tell us about the video the video that we were watching earlier on? It was definitely a very nice performance, if I may say.
Sure, thank you. That's one of Telemon's fantasies for solo flute. They're some of my favorite pieces. He wrote 12 of them. Um, when string players are all alone, they reach for solo Bach. In the same vein, us oboe players, that's what we reach for. Those Telemon fantasies are just really great pillars of the Baroque repertoire. I love playing Baroque music. Um, and so originally written for the traverso, the flute, but they work really, really well on modern oboe. And so they're really a staple of the solo oboe repertoire. I can't get enough of them. I play them all the time, really.
All right. Well, it's definitely interesting to hear that you take uh, take that much fascination into this particular music. So, as mentioned earlier on, you started playing the oboe at the age of 8. So, other than that, what can you tell us about how you actually got started with the oboe?
Sure. Um, yeah, I started when I was 8. Growing up in a public school in the U.S., we all right around that age, going into what fourth grade for us, we all started to pick instruments, and I could not wait for this moment because I come from a musical family, and I had always wanted to um, start playing music. My grandfather was a jazz musician. He played saxophone, clarinet, and flute. And a lot of the ornaments that I like to do in Baroque music, I'm always inspired by him and by other jazz musicians for that sort of improvisation. I like to put that into my Baroque music playing. Um, so he was the first musician in our family, but I also have an uncle who is a clarinet professor over at the Northwestern University in Chicago. I have another cousin, his son, who plays clarinet professionally in the Auckland Philharmonic in New Zealand. My brother is also a clarinetist. And I'm a little bit of an odd duck, but my mother played the oboe through college, and that's where I got the idea from. So I figured I'd pick the oboe. It seemed like it was a departure enough from the other clarinetists in my family, but it was, familiar enough and close to home that it felt right. And I just always loved it. I always was so attracted to the sound. Whenever I would listen to a recording, I would hear the oboe, and it was like I had to stop whatever I was doing. That particular sound just it was like a stun ray. It just really pierces your heart, and I've always loved kind of picking out the oboe from the orchestra. Um, so speaking of recordings, when I was kind of getting into it, my parents got me a present for my 10th birthday, I believe, and the present was a recording of oboe solo, so I could like really hear the oboe um, featured in some music. And I remember I used to listen to this recording every single night. I'd like pop on my headphones, put the CD in my little lime green CD player, and I'd fall asleep to it. And my mom would have to come in and kind of pry the headphones off of me. And that recording was a couple of oboe concertos recorded by Peter Cooper, who is the principal oboist of the Colorado Symphony. So this was the only sound that I knew. That was the only thing I was trying to replicate. Um, and now I play in the Colorado Symphony, and I sit next to Peter Cooper every day, which is really cool. Um, so I was always inspired from the beginning, and um, uh, where I am now is really like a dream come true. I've always been excited to practice. Um, I attended the Juilliard pre-college division, as you said. which was really great training. And then I did my collegiate training at the New England Conservatory with John Farillo, who really put me through boot camp and gave me a lot of skills necessary for um, being a really substantive musician in the 21st century. And yeah, now I'm here in Denver.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that with us. It was definitely very interesting about hearing your family's background as like woodwind instrumentalists. So yeah, it's definitely very interesting to hear that. But it definitely surprised me to hear that that you listened to Peter Cooper as a kid, because I remember seeing his name on the list of names in your orchestra. So yeah, that was that. So it must be a treat to be able to play alongside like what's essentially your childhood idol. So yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Nick. What makes the learning the oboe that much different from learning other instruments?
It's very, very different. So think about it this way: if you give an oboist and a violinist an hour to practice, they both go into the practice room. The violinist opens the case, rosins the bow, maybe does a couple warm ups. 30 seconds has passed, and that person is ready to play some scales or whatever, what have you. Um, the oboist gets into the room, opens up the case, puts the instrument together. You put a reed in to soak. That reed is not going to be ready to play for at least another minute. Once the reed is ready to play, you test it, and maybe it's not quite ready for you to do your warm ups on. So what do? You have a decision to make. You can either take the reed and play on it as is and fight through it, whether it's a little too crazy or a little bit too stuffy. You can work on the reed using a knife and your tools to make it better to play on. Or you can soak up a different reed and take some time to do that too. So a couple minutes has already elapsed, and the violinist is well on their way to playing through all of their scales, and the oboist hasn't even played a note yet. And so if you multiply that by all of the days that young musicians are practicing, it's a lot harder to accrue all of those hours on the oboe because there's so much other stuff that you have to think about. Plus, at the end of that hour, maybe the violinist has done kind of, I don't know, with breaks and with, distractions, 45, 50 minutes of good practicing. The oboist, maybe, 35, 40. But after that hour, I have to go back to the reed desk and make my oboe reeds. The violinist can put in another hour. So when you're learning the oboe, once you get sophisticated enough to make your own oboe reeds, there's work to be done before you practice, and there's work that is still unfinished after you practice. So that's why it's really tricky. Lots of different things, specifically in regards to the setup and the reeds that you have to think about, and that can impede you at different parts in the process, that a string player might not even have to think about.
It definitely didn't come to mind that the preparation of the reed was that time consuming. So, well, thanks for sharing that with us, Nick. So what makes a professional oboist job different than that of other musicians, other than what you already mentioned about having to manage your own reeds and such?
Sure. So this idea of having to manage the reeds, not just as a student but as a professional, it makes the job different. So consider, a lengthy career in a professional orchestra. Like I'm hoping to be playing my job for at least 20 more years, if not 25 or 30 more. At the end of that, if you're in the trombone section, you've probably played all this repertoire before, and it gets easier and easier, and more familiar, and you just know every corner of the pieces, and you know when you need to look up and when to tune in, to make a tempo change. You kind of know pretty much what's going to happen, or within a range of what is going to happen before even the first rehearsal. So as I go through my career, obviously all of that stuff becomes more familiar to me too. But I always have that challenge of trying to make a reed to play on and sound my best every single day. And that challenge, while I hope to acquire more and more skills and refine those skills, so it gets easier and easier, that challenge still exists the first day of my career as it will on the very last concert.
Right. So okay. So I didn't expect that the reed would be the main issue for even a professional such as yourself. All right. So what do even other musicians really understand about the oboe?
Sure. Again, this idea of having to make here's a little visual. This is my oboe reed, and here is my case with all of my oboe reeds. Missing a couple, but I like to keep a lot. I like to keep a really good rotation so I can not just play on one reed all the time. Um, I assume that for other musicians in the orchestra, um, we're still so misunderstood, even among our colleagues. Like, for example, maybe I'll give you a little demo, but when I'm warming up to play a rehearsal, and every musician has experienced hearing the oboist kind of peeping on the reeds and making all these funny noises. And for me, those funny noises that are really irritating to some, that actually gives me a lot of information on how the reed's working and what I need to do to it, even without trying it in the instrument. I'm spoiler alert. I'm gonna talk more about reeds, but I will tell you now that I can make a reed probably 95% of the way there, just by hearing the sound of the reed alone, because I'm getting all of this information. I'll give you a demo in a second after this guy is soaked up in room temperature water.
All right.
Yeah, so I don't think anyone in the orchestra really kind of considers that we have this challenge to overcome every single day, and reeds are made from a kind of a relative of bamboo. It's a plant. It doesn't want to be a music making object, but we use our tools and our crafting skills to make them into something that you can make music on.
Right. Well, just to elaborate a bit more on this, because I believe that some other woodwind instruments also use reeds, right? So is this challenge like regarding the complexity of the reed limited mainly to oboists, or the other woodwind instruments experience this to a certain degree as well?
Sure. So we're not the only ones who struggle with reeds. Obviously, clarinets, saxophones, they have a single reed. So it's really kind of more of a simple design that attaches to a mouthpiece and vibrates against that. Reeds for oboists, not only oboists, but bassoonists, we use what we call a double reed, and so that's one piece of cane. I shall show you. This is one piece of cane. Can you see it? Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
I lost my.
We may have to stop the images to get a better view.
Yeah, I'd love to see my video, so I'm not like holding it up here. But anyway, so you see, it's one piece, and that gets folded over into something that looks like this.
Okay.
Hopefully you can see the kind of the little bend in that. So that gets folded over and tied together, and then those vibrate against each other. So the design of a bassoon reed or an oboe reed is a lot more complex, and that's why, especially in the U.S., but all over the world, oboists and bassoonists make their own, so they have that control over the sound. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. As you mentioned, like the oboists have to encounter a lot of problems with the reeds. So my question was basically, was this limited to oboists, or do other woodwind instrumentalists experience this to a certain degree? But yeah, I think.
Yeah, so bassoonist and oboist, we're the two members of the orchestra who have to make our reeds ourselves. But bassoon reeds are much larger than oboe reeds, so there's kind of it's like a bigger target to hit. Um, they're um, with an oboe, the smaller the amount of cane that you're working on, and if you look at that, it's like you're blowing into a drinking straw or something. Um, there's there's a lot more that can go wrong, and it has to be all much more precise. So the I think oboists tend to have it probably a little bit harder than bassoonists. It's just a little bit more hit or miss to really always have a great oboe reed. Whereas for also for English horn, the tenor cousin of the oboe, those reeds are a little bit bigger. There's a little bit more wiggle room, um, a little bit more margin for error. So the smaller it is, the trickier it is to come up with a good reed every single day.
All right. Thanks for sharing that with us, Nick, and thanks for indulging my question there. All right. So let's see. So what's a good choice? What do you consider to be a good oboe reed, and how do you make good reeds consistently?
Sure. So I'll take you through the process. Um, a good oboe reed allows you to do everything you want to do musically. So, um, just like a string on a string instrument, or the lips on a brass instrument, the reed is the part of the instrument for us that actually does the vibrating. So it's very, very important that that vibration is first of all, that you have enough of it, and second of all, that it's of a quality that allows you to produce a sound that is pleasant and not like a kazoo, for example. Um, so, um, so a good reed, first things first, has to start playing when I want it to start playing. It's not necessarily a great reed, but it's what I have soaked. So a good read, first things first, responds immediately when I want it to. Because when you're in the orchestra, when you're in a chamber group, it's not your call when you start the piece. It's the conductors or your colleagues. So I have to be ready to go, and that tool has to be there for me. Second, the reed has to play in tune. A reed, depending on the way you scrape it with your knife, a reed can be too sharp, a reed can be too flat, a reed can be too inconsistent and unstable. So I like to put mine in a certain window that works for me, so that I know that I can reliably play in tune with my colleagues. And in that order, responsiveness, in tune or stability, and the third important thing that a good reed has to do is play with a good sound. This is really 90% of how we make a sound on the instrument, and a reed just a couple scrapes different can sound in totally one direction, like beautiful and buttery and golden, or it can sound
Very
like
raspy,
you're
very raspy.
yeah,
I suppose. Yeah.
yeah, a little rough, a little rough. So to make the reeds, I actually go all the way from this raw material. This is a tube of the scientific name is Arundodonax, but it's kind of a cousin of bamboo, just a cane that grows really well in China, in the south of France. There's some cane in Mexico. I forget where else in the world. But this then gets kind of split into. I'll take about a third of the diameter of that circle. And so that turns into this. So now, this little piece of split cane, I've kind of clipped it down with the terrifyingly named guillotine, which I can show you a picture of later. So now it's ready to be put through a machine that is not... So we take care of scraping the outside, the bark of it. On the inside, we use a special machine that actually gouges out some of the pulpier part of the cane to make it thin enough. That's the piece I was showing earlier. So this is now kind of hollowed out and thinned, and through trial and error over decades and decades, we now have measurements that we actually shoot for within 1/100th of a millimeter. And I can actually tell the difference if it's, 59 hundredths or 60 hundredths or 61 hundredths or 58 hundredths. I notice the difference in the final product. So now, this doesn't look anything like an oboe reed, but it's about to look a lot more like one. So this gets folded over. I soak it so it's pliable. I fold it over so it's about to become the double reed. But before that, I use a razor blade with a tool, excuse me, that looks like this. And that is kind of the guide for the shape of the piece of cane. So I just kind of use a razor blade or a knife to pare away the excess, and that leaves me with this. So this, the shaped piece of cane, then gets tied onto this little, it's a metal tube with cork surrounding it. And so finally, after that tying process, now this starts to look recognizable. That almost looks like a reed. So all we have to do now is clip it open. Right now it's still closed at the top. That fold is not opened up yet. So I have to get it thin enough to clip it open so that I get two reeds that vibrate together. And then, and only then, I can scrape it down using a knife, a very sharp knife, and I get to, shape it and sculpt it into what I want it to look like and what I want it to sound like. So the whole process can take, between all of the steps, it definitely takes a couple days, but that kind of, the magic of going from something that doesn't vibrate to something that makes music, that can take as little as 10-15 minutes if I'm really hustling. And that magic is just there's something so special about turning something that's an inanimate object into something that you can play well on and sound good on. And that process, no matter how many times I do it, it's always a miracle when the reed comes out.
All right. Well, it's definitely interesting to hear all that. So, like, I know how people usually tend to call, like, how some musicians tend to call themselves perfectionists, but I think you guys, you oboists tend to take it to another level, I think, with all those measurements that you guys have to do as well. All right. So, how do you balance trying to make the best reads in based on your own playing, I suppose, and the idea of transcending your equipment and just making music?
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. It's so easy because this process has to be so precise, to be so wrapped up in the nitty gritty, and to be so detail oriented to the point of perfectionism. and that can really get in the way of really good music making. So you have to approach it from both sides. So first and foremost, I want to be refining my reed making process and making sure that everything is clicking on all cylinders every single day, so that I'm cranking out the best reads possible all the time. So I have the best tool to work with, but on the other end, I have to come from this other direction of making sure that I'm always expanding my sense of musical expression, and I'm always kind of trying to use my imagination and be creative to really get the sound in my ear that I want to come out. So you can't have it with just one. They have to both meet in the middle, that kind of technical side of things. And for oboists, really the mechanical side of things, plus the artistic side of things. Once those meet, then you've got something special. But yeah, as much work as I do on the reed alone, I also do practicing and listening, trying to get great performances and great sounds in my ear. Just expanding what I think is possible, and just listening to all sorts of music, so that I'm not getting too myopic about just the reeds alone. It's just so easy to get so focused into that, because I spend pretty much equal time at my reed desk as practicing. So it's very, very important to keep that balance for me, and to make sure that I'm always working on not just the mechanical but the artistic element of playing the oboe.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Nick. It definitely sounds like you do have to focus on both aspects of your craft. So, how about this? How does the impermanence of the oboe reed affect the way you approach music?
Sure. So these reeds, I just told you about how long it takes to make them, but they don't really last very long. Again, kind of the smaller the reed, the more persnickety it's going to be, the more annoying it's going to be to work with, and the shorter it's going to last. So a reed, it's about knowing the reed's lifespan. That's super important. And a reed can, once the reed is kind of scraped out, it takes a couple days to kind of settle. There's a break-in process for sure, and I wouldn't go out and play a concert on something that I just made from this. But in any case, so there's a kind of a golden hour for a reed, and that's usually like a couple days to a week, and you're getting the very best that a reed can offer. You're getting something that's fresh and vibrant, but also and it has some substance to it, so you can really blow into it and really express yourself. After that, you can still play on a reed and still make a beautiful sound on it, but you might lose a little bit of the response. You might the tone kind of might lack some of that luster, or it might become a little bit more unstable as well. An old reed can. So because of that, I always have to make a new reed. I try to do it absolutely daily. And what I used to do is just try to, it's so easy to try to just control the process. And that can just lead to so much frustration. And I'll tie this all back to the way I make music, but it's so easy to just get so bogged down in trying to craft this little thing. And every piece of cane is different. And, a really good piece of cane really wants to vibrate, really lets me do everything I want to do musically. And I've come to realize that that piece of cane doesn't cross my desk every day. It's more like a once a week, once every other week, maybe even once a month sort of thing for a really, really good read that really makes me say, wow, I feel like I can do anything. So it's because of that, because that the window doesn't open all the time, that it forces me in my process to make sure that everything else is as solid as it can be. My fundamentals on the instrument, being able to play it any dynamic all the time. Part of that is the read, but part of that is also the work that I do. And just making sure that I'm always in this mindset of being creative and artistic and approaching music, trying to convey an emotion that another human being is going to connect with. So in order to do that, I have to have the best tools available, and I don't always have it. It's like if you took like 6 microphones and you wanted to say the same thing at the same, in the same way through all of them, but they were different qualities of microphones and set at different levels, you'd have to adjust the way you're saying that phrase, whether it's "I love you." If that's through a microphone that sounds crackly and garbled, you're gonna have to do something a little bit different to make sure that your point gets across. So what I have to do is make sure that I have the best microphones. The metaphor is the reed is the microphone in this instance. I have to have the best set of microphones that allows me to say what I want to say, the way I want to say it, and also to make sure that what I want to say musically is super clear in my mind.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing all that with us, Nick. It definitely came, because when you said that you had to soak up reeds and such, it definitely came across my mind. Why wouldn't you try soaking up multiple ones? But yeah, it definitely sounds like that's the reason why you do have your multiple reeds and your cycle in place. So yeah, thanks for sharing all that with us. I think we are getting close to our time for the Q&A, so I might have to speed things up a bit. So, because as you mentioned earlier on, other than the technical aspects of your craft, which included reed making and such, you also did have to tackle the musical approach of your instrument. So, I'm assuming that inspiration definitely comes into a very important part of this. So, which musicians are your biggest inspirations? And do you draw inspiration from outside of music or the arts in general? I'm assuming one of your biggest idols would be Peter Cooper.
Yeah, of course. I really do look up to Peter. It's a joy to play with him. He's an outstanding artist. This is my principal oboe in Colorado. It's amazing when you can sit next to someone and just hear every snap, crackle, and pop in their sound and every single color they're making. So Peter and the rest of my colleagues are definitely my first and kind of closest inspirations. But I also love to listen to plenty of oboists. I listen to a lot of recordings of my teachers, of their teachers, and I love especially listening to singers. I love hearing opera and art song, and I think some of my biggest inspirations are singers like Anne-Sophie von Otter, Cheryl Studer, Love Renee Fleming too. But yeah, that has also helped me kind of shape my sound. And outside of music, I'm always inspired by the culinary arts. I love food and music, and I think food is definitely higher on that list of priorities. But I love really great, high quality, artistically made food. And I just grew up watching so much Food Network, and that always inspired me. The creativity of being able to put totally different ingredients together and make it one sort of idea really always inspired me.
Well, I'm sure a lot of our audience can agree with that. Well, if you're that much of a foodie, I think at one point, once everything gets better, I think you could actually come over to Malaysia. We'll definitely have to treat you to some of the dishes here as well.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So I think we have time for two more questions before we move on to the Q&A. So what advice? So one of those would be, what sort of advice would you give to the young and upcoming oboists?
Absolutely. As a young oboist, the first thing that you want to do is listen a lot. Get some really great sounds in your ear. Figure out what sounds good to you and what you might be a little bit less interested in. But we have so many great resources like Spotify and all sorts of music streaming platforms. So use those, and YouTube, of course, to your advantage. There's so much you can hear, and so much that you can just widen your world. And the next is inevitably you probably will start learning how to make reeds, and when you do with young oboists, there are kind of two camps that you can really fall into: the serial under scrapers and serial over scrapers. So with the over scraper, you're taking off tons and tons of cane until all of a sudden, oops, there goes half the reed. With the under scraper, you're being a little bit more cautious, and you might not quite make a reed that's totally finished or working, but you might not make that same mistake. So for me, I was definitely in that latter category. I was an under scraper. And my advice to people like me is just go for it. The sooner you finish that read and make that mistake, the sooner you can learn from it. And that's the most important part, is just going through that process and trial and error, and being daring enough to make the mistake so that you can learn from the failure.
Yeah, those are definitely very wise words there, Nick. I think basically everyone can, I think anybody can take that to heart. So with that, I think we have time for one last question before we move on to the Q&A. So this comes from the JPO itself. As you may have heard, the Chesterton Philharmonic Orchestra, or JPO, has involved itself in a variety of activities. So on behalf of the JPO, I would like to ask about your views on the JPO, and if you may have any suggestions so that our members and the organization may further improve itself.
Sure, it seems like a wonderful organization, and I'm so impressed that you've created this body of amazing interviews with amazing artists. And I just think that's a brilliant thing. And I think other organizations should be taking that example from you. Um, it, it's just incredible the amount of advice that you've kind of compiled all in one YouTube channel. And I love that. I think it's such a great way to circumvent, keep the learning going during this pandemic. So I think I love for other orchestras to be thinking creatively like that too. And by all means, keep innovating like this, and keep these interview sessions going, well past when we can meet back in person safely. I think it's brilliant, and I'm very impressed with this resource that you've created.
All right, well, thanks for your kind words there, Nick. I'm very sure our members are definitely very happy to hear you say all that. Well, I think with that, we do have to move on to the Q&A section. We are running a little bit late on time. So yeah, with that, we'll move on to Q&A. I think we should be receiving a few from YouTube soon, but before that, I think I'll just add on to some of the ones that I've seen on the chat as well. So one would be regarding the reads, because you did mention that some reads past maybe your golden hour, or maybe even before then. You did mention that they would end up having a response delay. So have you ever experienced such delays during a performance?
Yes, of course. I think every oboist has gotten on stage, picked a reed, you think it's okay, and then you start playing the repertoire and you realize that it's demanding a lot more out of your reed than you thought. Um, I think that is has been kind of the problem I've been trying to solve in the early years of my career. Um, what feels good when I'm playing and just testing it out at my reed desk right now, and what is gonna feel like I can actually do everything that I want to do later when I'm under the gun, under pressure. But yeah, it happens to the best of us, and again, it's not just the reed; it's how you play. It's your fundamentals, and trying to just the reason why the oboe is a really difficult instrument is that, if you go down to a piano, you hit a button and you make a sound. On an oboe, just ba making that sound, that takes a lot of practice and coordination. So in a performance situation, you want those fundamentals to back you up so you can start something softly, beautifully, consistently.
I guess this is where the perfectionism takes place even more regarding the prep side of things. All right, thanks for your response to that, Nick. With that, we have a few questions coming in through the chat. So one of our audience is asking, is there any maintenance needed for keeping the new unused reed in good condition? And how long does a new reed last in different climates?
Yeah, I'm over here in Denver. We are at high altitude and it's very dry. Both of those things make the cane vibrate less. So I actually noticed that my reeds last for a shorter period of time here. In a wetter climate, you can probably get a lot more life out of a reed. But in terms of maintaining it, the best thing you can do is have a bunch of reeds so that you can rotate, so you're not playing on one all the time. It's a really good idea if you have something that you really like to save it. I've actually gone too far in that direction in my career, and I just have reeds that are sitting in my box that are not getting used, and that doesn't make any sense either. But if you can rotate your reeds and so you have a stable and you're not putting all the work on one reed, that can really make all of them last a lot longer. Always soak in room temperature water for about a minute before you start playing. And if you do have a reed that's kind of old, what you can do is soak that in hot water, and it kind of gives it a second life. And I've used that to get through a lot of practice sessions. It can be really, really helpful. And of course, don't damage your reed. Make sure you keep it in a safe place. It's either on your oboe or it's in your case. Never out in the open when where it can be damaged.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Nick. So moving on, we do have another audience member saying, "Hello, Nicholas. You were talking about the different sound quality made by the different reeds. Would you like to share with us about the difference between German and French style oboes?" And
that's a great question. Yeah. So the oboe is also a unique instrument because across the world, people approach the instrument completely differently. I will give you kind of the Reader's Digest version of this, but I know a little bit less about the differences in European styles of playing, but there's a big schism between American style of playing and kind of this pan-European style of playing, which is really used all around the world in South America and in Asia. And we do something that's a little bit different. So the difference is, let me see if I can pull up. I'm going to share my screen. So I'll show you the kind of the main difference between oboe reeds, between American and European. So on the left, we've got a reed that looks like mine. that's an American style reed, and you notice that the tip is the most translucent. There's something that's a little bit thicker right behind it, and then you also scrape out of the back. And to me, that gives you a sound that has highs and lows. It gives you depth and dimension, and just makes the sound a little bit rounder than if you didn't have that extra part scraped out. On the other side, you've got this European short scrape reed. So you notice that basically only half of the reed is the cane is taken off, so that tip at the top becomes even more important. So I think what we do in America is really interesting because no one else really does. Even around the States, some people, not all people, not all oboists do this and scrape this kind of reed and try to go for that full, complete sound. American and European playing, both styles are so beautiful, and we both go for expression and sweetness of sound, and beauty. But the timbre can be very different. It's partially because of that actual mechanical difference of scraping more of the reed, so you get kind of more of the sound. When I try to play on my European colleagues' reeds, I'm kind of missing this bottom portion of my sound, and I don't feel like I'm expressing myself the way I want to. This all comes from. So the American school is kind of a derivative of what the French were doing around the turn of the 20th century. We had Marcel Tabuteau is kind of the grandfather of this tradition, and he came over from France, probably early 1900s, and started doing things a little bit differently. He wasn't the first one to do that kind of long scrape, but he was the first person to really kind of make a career off of that. So he was making a sound. The French sound at that time was kind of nasal and very, I don't want to say small, but it was a little bit less about the breadth and more about the kind of delicacy of it. And so that tradition from France came over here, and Tabuteau was playing with the best conductors, Stokowski, Toscanini at the time, and he was really being pushed musically, and I think that forced him to create an even more kind of round, dolce, sweet sound, as well as this kind of sense of shaping and phrasing that was unique in that he was just doing it to a degree that was superior to so many oboists at that time. And it wasn't until Tabuteau started teaching at the Curtis Institute and his students started to get out there that our orchestras in the U.S. started to be populated by Americans rather than having to import solo oboes from Europe. So he really started this school of playing, and not only is it a way to approach the instrument and a way to think about music and sound and shaping and phrasing, but also you can see those little differences physically in the way we make our reeds differently. I hope that answered your question.
Well, it definitely did, because it definitely brought up a lot of. It definitely brought up the fact that there are definitely different styles of playing the oboe and such. So yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, Nick. I think we should have enough time for two last questions before we have to end the session.
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief.
All right, so let's see. We have one of our audiences saying, "Thank you, Nick, for your sharing." So how young can one start learning the oboe, considering the fact that you yourself started at 8? And is there a special oboe for kids to learn because of the size?
Yes, I started, I think, a little bit. I was young for that school level. So I was a little bit younger than most people when they start. But there are also schools of thought around the U.S. That you should start on a different instrument and then switch to the oboe. Like typically, there are very intense school music programs in Texas, and a lot of like the prevailing thinking there is start on clarinet, and then get whoever is showing talent or whatever to switch to oboe, because that's the one that's going to be harder. For me, I played recorder for a year, and there was enough similarity in the way you finger the instrument that it seemed like it wasn't that big a jump. So I think if you start for a little while on the recorder, you can actually start oboe pretty early, and it's just a matter of having a source of reeds that works for the student. It can be very hard to get something that's light enough that the student really feels that they're not struggling on the reed, and they can really express themselves. And I know of oboes that are a little bit smaller. I actually had a student who showed up with one of those instruments. I'm not sure if I would recommend that unless you're really too small to kind of get around the keys. It's not a terribly large instrument, but at the same time, if you're, I probably wouldn't start anyone on the oboe earlier than probably 7 or 8, because it does take an exceptional amount of patience. And there are skills that you can acquire, like on the recorder, or learning first on the piano, so you have a better understanding of music, and then kind of deal with this instrument that has a few more technical challenges to overcome.
All right. Well, thanks for that response, Nick. It definitely so yeah, it's definitely very eye-opening for those, I'm assuming, that want to teach oboe to young children. All right, so we have time for one last one before we end tonight's program. So this audience member is saying, "Hi, I'm a music lover who doesn't play any instrument. May I know why the orchestra always tunes to the oboe?" Okay.
Sure, that's a great question. I think it's because of two reasons. The oboe uh, doesn't have any sort of tuning apparatus on it. It's not, you don't have a peg, you don't have a slide. The oboe comes in three pieces. You put it together, and then you stick the reed in all the way, and it stays. You don't mess with that. So I make my reeds to play at a certain pitch, and so that's one of the reasons why I think we tune to the oboe, because it has that. It's designed to be played at one pitch. The other reason is I think it's just a sound that kind of catches the ear, and so that's why it's that's the one who plays the first note. We're kind of at the center of the orchestra. We're kind of the guardians of the pitch, and so I make sure that I make my reeds so that I can do that job. And sometimes that's the hardest thing you have to do in the night. That's sometimes I think, why does the oboe have to play the tuning aids? It's like the most terrifying solo of the evening. It's just like another thing to make me stressed out.
There has to be a lot of pressure on the oboe in terms of like the pre-prep.
Mm.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing all that with us, Nick. I think we do. I think we do have to end tonight's program. We are going slightly over time already. So yeah. Well, once again, thank you so much for all the responses. It was definitely very interesting to hear everything that you've been sharing. So sorry once again, sorry everyone, but we are coming to the end of tonight's broadcast. So we would just like to remind everyone that our JPO family program will be broadcasted twice a week until further notice. So that's every Wednesday and Sunday night in Malaysia time. So that will differ depending where you are, I suppose. So we'll hope that you join us next time with our next guest, who will be revealed at a later date. So more details of this can be found on our Facebook page. A video recording of tonight's broadcast will also be available on our YouTube channel, along with the past webinars and the soon to be broadcasted interviews. So feel free to share the Zoom webinar registration link, the JPO YouTube channel, and maybe even the JPO Facebook page with your friends and family. For our YouTube audience, if you are enjoying our program, please show your support to us by pressing the like and subscribe button down below. Once again, you guys have been an amazing audience, and we from the JPO family wishes that everyone stay safe and healthy as we continue to face this crisis together. So with that, I will now be leading the prayer to end tonight's program. So please pray in whatever faith that you believe in regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. We pray that everyone in the world continues to stay strong in surviving through these difficult times, and the solution to the virus will soon be found. We pray that governments across the world continue to improve upon their efforts and decision-making so as to protect their people and curb the spread of the virus. We pray for the safety and well-being of everyone working as we now make our way halfway through March, and as parts of the world continue to face new surges of cases. We pray for the continued safety and morale of the frontliners who are risking their lives so that they may continue to provide for those in need. That, I think we've come to the end of tonight's program. So once again, thank you, Nick, for joining us tonight. And thank you to everyone joining us on this program. So good night or good morning to you, Nick. And we hope to see you all again next time. See you.